I had been married for 15 years. My wife, Maria, and I had 8 children. And I thought things were going pretty well. We got involved with a Catholic family ministry that encouraged us to read encyclicals like letters from the Pope. And I had not really done any of that. I had attended a Catholic college and I hadn't read maybe a line or two of an encyclical. And so I was reading Catechesis in Our Times, which is John Paul II's letter. And at first it was hard to read this stuff because there were words I didn't know and I had to look up. But then I started to get the swing of it. So I was reading about catechesis. What's that mean? It means to echo, and it means to echo the truths of the faith. And so that we're supposed to teach the faith faithfully, correctly. So I was reading this and it talked about what you do in the family. And it said the family's catechetical activity has a special character, which is in a sense, irreplaceable. It's like, okay, family is very important. Education in the faith by parents, which should begin from the children's tenderest age. So we're supposed to start early, is already being given when the members of a family help each other to grow in faith through the witness of their Christian lives. A witness that is often without words, but which perseveres through a day-to-day life lived in accordance with the gospel. And I read that and I was like, okay, so we need to live our faith in Christ. We need to be good, right? We need to be nice. Which is kind of a lame definition of catechesis, but that's what I had at the time. This catechesis, this teaching of the faith, is more incisive when in the course of family events, such as the reception of sacraments, the celebration of a great liturgical feast, the birth of a child, a bereavement, care is taken to explain in the home the Christian or religious content of these events. And I thought, great, that's what we're doing. Like if something comes up and we can talk about how the faith applies to it, we're good, right? And then I read these next lines and they cut me to the quick. It said, but that is not enough. And it's like, it was almost, I could hear John Paul II with his Polish accent, but that is not enough. And I thought, are you kidding? That's all I'm doing. Like, what do you mean that that's not enough? And so I went on to read and it said, Christian parents must. And I thought, oh no, you just used the word must. Okay, so this is serious. Christian parents must strive to follow and repeat within the setting of family life the more methodical teaching received elsewhere. The fact that these truths about the main questions of faith and Christian living, so about life, are thus repeated in a family setting impregnated with love and respect will often make it possible to influence the children in a decisive way for life. And I read that and I thought, holy cow, like I'm not doing that. And I was like, but you know what, we're homeschooling. So my wife is homeschooling our children. So like, we're good because this is happening. So I told my wife, I said, I read this thing from John Paul II and it kind of bothered me until I figured out the fact that, because we're homeschooling and you're teaching the kids. So like, we're doing this. And she looked at me and she said, Michael, you're not doing anything in this area. I thought, oh, okay. I kind of ticked her off. But she's right. Like I wasn't doing anything in that area. And so I was bothered by that. We were teaching a baptism class at our church, and I would read through the baptismal rite for the new parents because we had 8 kids. So I would know how to go through this, right? We've done this several times. And so this particular time, I was reading through it, and it says to the parents, you say, what do you ask of the church? And the parents say baptism, because that's what we're here for. We ask the church for baptism. And then it goes on to say, the celebrant says, you have asked your child to be baptized. In doing so, you are accepting the responsibility of training him in the practice of the faith. And this time when I read that, I just stopped and thought, wow, I'm responsible for training my child in the faith. And it goes on to say, it will be your duty to bring him up to keep God's commandments as Christ taught us, and by loving God and loving neighbor. Do you clearly understand what you are undertaking? And the parents always say, I do. And I said, I do 8 times. And oh my gosh, I don't feel like I've kept my word. And I have this duty to do this, and I'm supposed to train them in the faith. And I got that feeling that I felt back in college. I was pretty good at test taking, and the reason I was good is that in class I would pay attention to the teacher. When the teacher would say, or the professor, when they would say, "Okay, this is important," I would put a big star in my notes. This is going to be on the test. And so when the time came, I'd study for the test, and I would read all the stuff that had the stars next to it, and for sure memorize that. Well, this one professor I had said at the beginning of the semester, "Go ahead and here's the reading," and then during the semester, she talked about a whole bunch of different things, and it had nothing to do with the reading. So when it came time for the test, I didn't study, even though she said we were supposed to read it. Professors say that all the time. But I didn't read that other stuff. I was busy doing other things. And so we got to the test, and I started to read the questions on the test, and 70% of the questions had to do with the reading, and only 30% with the class notes, which is the only thing that I had studied. And I had this sunken feeling. I thought, I am going to flunk this test. I better try to get as many points as I could. Well, I had that same sunken feeling when I read this thing about training my children in the faith. It's like, Lord, I haven't done this. And so with that, I was convicted. I was like, I've got to do something. So I started in my family. I thought, okay, I'll do some family catechesis. And I got this family catechesis book, and I pulled it out. And after dinner one night, I said, "Okay, kids, we're gonna read this family catechism." And I started to read it to the kids, and their eyes began to glass over. At first, they were excited for a good 30 seconds that I was going to read them something, but then it didn't go over. They hated it. Quite frankly, they hated it. So I was thinking, gosh, I've got to find some way to do this. And so I started to think of well, is there some other way? And I started to pull up. What occurred to me was why don't you use some YouTube videos or do something fun so that there's a spoonful of sugar to help the medicine go down. So I started to make it more interesting, which is what was the beginning of the Strong Catholic Dad ministry, at least the origins of it. It didn't start right there, but 10 years before it started. But I thought, okay, I've got something now. I use these cool YouTube videos, and we're learning the truths of the faith. And I've got 8 kids, and I'm going forward. I'm doing what you're asking me to do, Lord. And about a year later, my son John Andrew came into my office, and he said, "Dad, can I talk to you?" And I said, "Sure, buddy. What do you want? Come on in." And he said, "Dad, you ever notice that you talk about the faith all the time?" And I was just I'm trying to be obedient to this thing here. But I was kind of getting ticked off because he had a little bit of an attitude. And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "You're kind of like a Jesus freak." And that made me mad. I was like, "What do you mean?" And he said, "You're talking about the faith all the time." And I said, "Oh, okay, I got that." And then I was really mad. So I just said, "Deuteronomy 6. He said, "There you go again." And I was bringing it up. Well, I had just recently read Deuteronomy 6, and so I know what it says. So I go to my shelf and pull that up my Bible off the shelf. And so he opened it up, and it's to Deuteronomy 6, and it said, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and all your strength." And take these words to heart. And so he took the Bible and he closed it kind of okay. And I said, no, keep reading, open it back up. So then he opened it back up, kind of ticked at me. And then it goes on to say, take these words to heart. And then it says in this particular translation, it says, drill these into your children. Drill these into your children. And then the rest of it says, recite them when you are at home and when you are away, when you lie down and when you get up. Bind them on your arm as a sign and let them be as a pendant on your forehead. And so he read all that, and I said, now you can stop. And so he closed the Bible and he walked out of my office, and I was just I won that one. I wasn't winning though. The reality was, I might have won that battle, but I was absolutely losing the war. I was losing the war for my son's heart. And he told me after, he's like, "Dad, I wanted you to talk to me and play football with me and talk to me about Peyton Manning and how the Colts were doing. And instead you're trying to make everything into a faith lesson." And so I was missing that when it came to learning the faith and teaching the faith. What is the faith? The faith, if you just say, the faith, what is that just a bunch of dogmas of the church? Well, yeah, they're dogmas, but they all point to one thing. And that one thing is that God is love. He's loving relationship. And so we're made to be in relationship with God, and that's about interacting with people and talking, and not just talking, spouting truths all the time. And so I was really enthusiastic about the faith, but I wasn't enthusiastic about the relationship that I needed to be having with my son. So like I was missing the half of it. And he even said in that thing from John Paul II, it said, if you do this in a family setting impregnated with love and respect, and it says the parents themselves profit from this effort that this demands of them, for in a catechetical dialogue of this sort, each individual both receives and gives. And it was like, you know what? I'm out here just giving, but I am not receiving from my children. I am not listening to them. And so that really changed my way of looking at my fatherhood and my faith, and how I needed to be like paying more attention and being a dad who doesn't just like know these individual truths of the faith, but a dad who knows the heart of my son and of my children. And it was clear to me that my oldest son was like the spokesperson for the family. He came on behalf of his siblings. They were too young to say what was really going on, but he was old enough to be able to say it. And so that totally changed how I approached my family. And I had a psychologist friend at some point who said, Mike, like, you know, when it comes to heaven, you know, describe to me what you think heaven would like. What's your best day? He's like, let's just do that. And I said, well, you know, like I would get, you know, like here's my, like I'd exercise in the morning, I'd go to work, I'd get my work taken care of, you know, I would get home and I'd get a couple more things done, then we'd have dinner and we'd say our prayers, and, you know, I get the kids to bed, and I go back in the office, get some more things done. And that would be a day well done. And he said, you know, do you realize that you just defined like happiness in heaven by getting things done? I was like, wow, I've got a little app that's called, you know, getting things done. I love to get things done. He's like, but you're missing it. Heaven is eternal relationship with God. It's all about relationship. So the thing that you need to get done is relationship, and you're not focusing on relationship, on being a good, loving father and an interested husband who's pursuing the wife of the heart of his wife. Like, you're not doing those things. You're just trying to check boxes, and you're annoying the heck out of the people around you. It was like, whew. And so my spiritual director at some point said, Michael, you need to understand that women are wired for relationship. And I was like, yeah, I know that. You know, they're good at it. And men are wired for action. I was like, yeah, I want to get things done. And he said, in order for a man to do well, he needs to shift gears, and he needs to focus. His action needs to be a focus on relationship. Because when a man gets in his sight that relationship is the goal, relationship with God, relationship with spouse and with children, that those are the most important, it's like, get out of the way. Because men are hunters, and they can go after that goal really well if they know what they're shooting for. It was like, okay, so like I need to shift gears and focus on relationship. It's like, yep. And then when you start to understand like that we're made in the likeness and image of God, who's a holy Trinity, like the Father. And what's the Father do? God delights in his children, which means that like I as a dad need to delight in my children. And not only do I need to delight in them, like I'm made to delight in them. Because if I'm made in God's image, then me delighting in my children is part of my fulfillment. And that's not what was happening. I was checking boxes, make sure that they were doing that they're fed and clothed, and that they were growing intellectually and physically, they were healthy, spiritually, they knew the truths of the faith. But I wasn't checking the box of being in relationship, where I was really trying to pursue their heart, get to know them, pay attention to them, find out what was really important to them beside just the way that I was trying to fashion them. And if you understand God's heart, God, he doesn't just give commands without also giving consolations. Like every duty he gives us. So if he gives you a duty to train your children in the faith, it's because it's going to bring you joy. It's going to bring you happiness. Like, it's going to be good. And it's not just good for them. It's also good for me. And so you also think back in the garden, God gave the command, to Adam and Eve, be fruitful and multiply. Be fruitful and multiply. Fill the earth and subdue it. All of those things come with a joy. Like, how many guys do you have to say, go be fruitful? And they're like, oh man, this is hard. Like, no, they're like, sure, I'm up for that, because there's a joy and a goodness in being fruitful. Well, in the same way, God isn't a jerk. God doesn't just say, okay, I give you a duty, train your children in the faith, and train them to be in loving relationship, and then leave you hanging to where it's just like eating dry oatmeal, and that's a horrible thing. It's like, it's the opposite. Like, I started into trying to teach my children about the faith, and then I realized I needed to be in relationship with them more. And as I started to do that and pay attention to them and delight in the ways that they answered questions and what they thought about and what was interesting to them, like it started to soften my heart, and I began to really enjoy them. And then I wanted to be more in relationship with them. And I wanted to talk about what was important and also hear from them what they thought was important. So Strong Catholic Dad, the ministry, like when I started to found that, it started out of this conviction that I had this duty to fulfill, but it got its culmination and actually the benefits that I never expected about how much I really started to enjoy my family, enjoy my kids. And so, like what a gift that is. And that's the foundation of why I started that in the first place, is to let other dads know, like, this is good news. Like you're made for this. And it's tough because a lot of dads are thinking, hey, I'm fine, I'm doing well. That's what I would have said. I totally would have said that. It's like, well, we're doing well. It could always be better. It's just like, yeah, it can be a lot better. Like for me, it's been substantially better. And you can see in my family, there's like, again, two halves of the family, that you've got the older kids where I have good relationship with them, but it doesn't compare to my younger kids, where it's like we've done more together. I've been more invested in their life, and frankly, they've been more interested in me because of my love for them. So when I founded Strong Catholic Dad, my goal was to hand dads tools, and the major tool that I hand them is using YouTube videos to connect with my kids, to pass on the faith, but really get to know them. And I'll be talking about those more as these podcasts go on, because they're really fun, and it's enjoyable. I'll give one more analogy where I feel like, just as a dad, this is how I feel, is Peter and Jesus. When Jesus comes to Peter the first time, and Peter's in the boat, and Peter's been fishing all night, and when he's there, Jesus is on the shore, and Jesus says, hey, can I get in your boat, Peter, and you take me out in the water and I'll preach to everybody? And Peter says, sure, because his brother Andrew told him, hey, this is the Messiah. And Peter's like, sure, get in my boat, you're the Messiah. So he's listening, hey, this sounds good. And then after Jesus is done talking, Jesus says, put out into the deep. And so Peter says, okay, and he says, and then cast out your nets. Well, you got to think about that for a second for fishermen. They have been fishing all night, so they're tired. Sound familiar, Dad? You get tired at the end of the day? I do. So just think about a dad. He's tired, and he's already pulled in his nets. When you pull in your nets, they're like raggedy. You got to tie them off. You got to get all the seaweed off. You got to clean them up, and you got to fold them so they're nice so that you can cast them out tomorrow. So all that's just finally done. You've been doing that while this preacher guy, who's maybe this Messiah, is speaking, and so and Peter doesn't even know him all that long. And this guy is telling him in the middle of the day, go out and throw your nets again. And so how does Peter respond? He responds, unlike me, who would have said, you're not a fisherman, you don't know what you're a preacher, but he didn't. Peter must have known that there was something about this man, and maybe he was a Messiah. And so he said, we've been fishing all night and caught nothing. Good, practical. That's exactly what's going on. But then the next thing he says, which is really an act of faith and an act of trust, he said, but at your command, we will let out our nets. So he was obedient to his duty. And after he was obedient to his duty, they cast out their nets in the middle of the day after they put it on the deep, and boom, there's an abundant catch beyond what they can imagine. And so it's almost sinking their boat. They call their friends over and they fill up 2 boats. And at that point, Peter just realizes, I am standing before God. He says, I am a sinful man. It strikes him as this abundance is well beyond anything on the natural plane. And Dad and Mom, I'll tell you, that's what's been happening to me in my life, as I've fulfilled my duty to talk about what's important in the truths of the faith, but also in life with my children, and enter into more of a loving relationship with them. It has transformed me to where there's an abundant catch, and I feel more and more humbled. Lord, thank you for these children, these souls that you've entrusted to me. They're more your kids than they are my kids, and you love them more than I ever possibly could. But darn, am I going to try, because I'm delighting in them more and more. And when I started Strong Catholic Dad, it's I want that for dads. And dads don't believe it's going to come. They're just oh, come on, I'm tired. At the end of the day, you're going to ask me to play YouTube videos for my kids. It's they get what they need to have in their catechesis class or at church. And I was just oh no, the church asks us to do this at home, and there is an abundance that's waiting for you, but you have to trust. So I'm gonna end on this trust note, because as dads, especially, like, we are challenged to trust. If you look at St. Faustina, so she was alive back in the 30s and 40s, and our Lord appeared to her, and you'll see it in churches. You see that image of Jesus with the red and white rays coming from his chest, and it says, "Jesus, I trust in you." That is the response that we all need to give to God, is to, like, trust him, because it's the complete opposite of what happened in the garden. The reason why the original sin happened is because Adam and Eve didn't trust that God was giving them the best thing. They thought, God's holding out on me. Satan's over here offering me that, this knowledge that God's not giving me. So I'm going with Satan. Now, it seems preposterous now, but we have the same challenge every day as we're facing financial difficulties and relationship problems, and there could be drug abuse and wounding and all these things going on in our life, and political problems, or wars and rumors of wars, and all this stuff that's going on. And it's hard to trust God in the midst of it, but that is our exact answer. Jesus, I trust in you. When we as men trust God, that changes everything. And Christ said, he gave us the formula. If you're into formula, again, I would listen to what the teacher said, and whatever they said, this is important, I'd put a star in my notes. I give you the star in the notes. You open the Bible and it says, Jesus tells us, seek first the kingdom of heaven. Now, he first of all said, the Father knows that you need to eat. The Father knows that you need clothes. He knows all these things. Seek first the kingdom of heaven. So trust him in all things. Don't lie, cheat, steal. Trust him. And if you do so, if you trust him and seek first God's kingdom, everything, all these things will be given unto you. Everything that you need will be handed to you if you trust. Trust is totally the key. It's St. Faustina said, it's the vessel by which we scoop up graces and that's what? God's power, God's strength, God's blessing poured upon us by trusting him, even when it seems like, hey, I might lose my job. Hey, I'm going to lose money if I tell the truth over here. Hey, I'm going to lose money if I tell somebody I just backed into, scratched their car. I'm going to lose money or I'm going to have some other difficulty that's going to happen if I follow these 10 commandments. It's no, it's the complete opposite. If I don't follow them, I'm going to have far more difficulty. And so what did God promise? What Christ promised? He promised life in abundance. And I want life in abundance. And the way to get life in abundance is by trusting God. That is totally our answer. And I just think, how much should you trust him? Look back at the example of the Israelites in the desert. Ladies and gentlemen, there were probably 2.3 million people. They estimate to have all of those people in the desert, the Jewish people, there's probably 1 million of them. If I'm wrong, it's 100,000. It's tons of people out there. And what happened? There was no water. How do you trust? There's no water in the desert. And so they go to Moses and they're we're thirsty, we're dying. What are we going to do? And what's Moses do? He prays to God in an absolutely impossible situation. They were going to die. And he hits a rock, and the rock breaks forth and water comes forth. You can look online. I did it in one of the Strong Catholic Dad guides. You can look at the rock of Horeb. You can see it on Google Earth right now. And you can see it's got a crack in it. And there are watermarks that come down and flood into the valley below the rock of Horeb. It is nuts. In the middle of the desert, there's enough water to feed 100,000, million people, however many, so that they can drink. This is crazy. That's the kind of trust God asks us, that he will bring water from a rock, but we have to trust him and not disobey. And so I would say, I'll end on this, is that when it comes to us as dads, and parents, our priority, our number one priority is the kingdom. And so we put first God, and right below God is our spouse. For my wife, it's she almost needs to look a little bit like God in terms of the way that I take care of her, that I pay attention to her, that I seek to love her and seek her out. And right below her are the kids. So they're my third priority. And my fourth priority, everything else. Because I've been entrusted with my relationship with God, my wife, and my children in a special way that exceeds any other relationship. Those are the primary. And what happens in society? These things totally get flipped. It goes from my job going, whoop, it's the most important thing. And then my kids, because they squeak a lot, it's okay, then I got to pay attention. My wife, it's okay, who's she again? It's oh yeah, okay, let's work this out. And she just becomes a coworker instead of my lover and the woman that I'm really seeking. And then God, I don't have time for him. Go to mass, pray, what's that all about? It's the complete opposite. And everybody when we live this way, when I lived this way, I was unhappy and anxious. And when it gets flipped and I put first God, wife, children, and everything else, there is a freedom that comes because I'm trusting a God who brings water from a rock. So that's what we're all called to, and that's where the joy is going to come from. I'll end with a quote from Mother Angelica. I just love this. She said, "The secret to holiness, the secret to really being a saint is to do God's will in each moment." She's like, that's it. You just do God's will and you will be a saint. So we'll end on that. Until we meet again, be strong in faith, strong in hope, and strong in love. God bless.